Accredited Production, or RAP. Mr. Hickson manages international operations and helps develop and refine RAP's strategy, specifically focusing on managing relationships with global brands and retailers and with governmental and other stakeholder organizations. Next up, we have Danielle Santos. Danielle Santos is currently a director of sourcing bottoms for their golf division at Ellis International, and is responsible for projecting and placing goods strategically and in alignment with their goals and financial targets of the company. Next, we have Jenna Pires. Jenna is a senior manager with the Business Assurance Innovations team at Intertek. She's accountable for client advisory services and advancement of new products related to corporate social responsibility. She is currently managing the development of Intertek's electronic-based auditing technology solutions that assist companies with gaining valuable insights into their supply chain. And last but certainly not least, we have Monica Escobar-Hertzoff of Worldwide Responsible Accredited Production. She's executive with experience in different fields such as social responsibility, human resources. Diverse and extensive 24-year career is complemented by academic training in social responsibility. So welcome, panelists. Clay, take it away.
Good morning again, everyone. Welcome. We're going to take our seats now so that we don't know how you feel down here, but we are very warm up here on the stage. And in fact, my head may be getting a little shiny, so if you do see the shine. But as Jason said, we're going to be talking about the importance of social compliance and how that fits into sourcing imperatives. Let me first ask you a few questions. What are the things that buyers insist upon when they are looking to buy something? They want to know, first and foremost, what is the price? Can you give me the price that I want? Secondly, am I off? I'm back on? You buy anything, you want to know what the price is. And if you're putting an order in for something, can you, the manufacturer, give me the price I want? Second is quality. Can you give me the quality that I want? And third, can you get it to me on time, the time frame that I need? Those are the sourcing imperatives that have been around for generations, for hundreds and thousands of years. Not a whole lot has changed on that score. But over the last several decades, a few other elements have been added to this equation. And one of those is social compliance, or responsible sourcing practices. In fact, today many buyers are saying that if you don't prove to me, the buyer, that you are an ethical manufacturer, then I can't place orders with you. So it's a conversation around these points that we're going to have here this morning, still morning for another 5 minutes today, so that we can gain a better appreciation no matter where we may be in the supply chain. Many of you here are from brands, you may be from retailers, you may be from manufacturers, but you also may be a designer somewhere else in the supply chain. So we're going to share some insights about that. So we hope that this will be a conversation not just among the four of us, but also including you and your insights and your questions. So the first question that we want to start off with is really from the perspective of each of the organizations that are represented here on the stage, which include Ellis, Intertek, which is a testing and auditing company, and then RAP, which is a standard-setting certification body in the apparel textile space. So from each of your perspectives, why is social compliance, ethical, responsible sourcing, why is that a sourcing imperative. And so we'll start here with Ellis.
Thank you, Clay. In our world of importer and buyer, I need to have a transparency with the factories to understand, where they're producing the garments, how they're producing, if it's according to all the local laws and our laws as well. So you don't want, labor that's not acceptable. You want to give them the humane conditions. So it's very important to have transparency with your suppliers.
Jenna?
Well, from Intertek's perspective, for over 15 years, social compliance, social audits of supply chain has been primarily a voluntary participation. Starting back in the 1990s, you had the first kind of media exposés around child labor. You had children, especially child labor, they're stitching the soccer balls in Pakistan. And that really kind of kick-started this movement. But still, it was primarily voluntary. There was no regulation, and brands and retailers were taking it upon themselves. But then if you fast forward now to 2010, you again had more media exposure related to human trafficking and forced labor, and it started being on social media. So consumer pressure they're seeing now on their phones, and seeing actual workers in these conditions. And then regulations have started to come on board, and it started in 2010 with the California Transparency Supply Chains Act. But that was small, and it was just in California. But then if you fast forward 2015, there was a national regulation with the United Kingdom Modern Slavery Act. So now it's becoming imperative because it's no longer just voluntary anymore. It is an actual regulation. And from every year since then, we have seen national regulation pop up. You have the French due diligence law, and Australia is about to pass a bill. So I foresee this growing and growing. And so it's no longer something that you can just voluntarily contribute to, or you're going to be required to per regulation.
So it's not just one entity saying, we have to have it. Monica, why is RAP so very much involved in this arena in social compliance?
Okay, under RAP perspective and social compliance perspective, we're looking forward to have factories that are aligned in the local laws and regulations to be competitive, to create a difference between the local markets, the international markets, and be able to show that they are really follow the laws of the land. So by having a good understanding about which are the challenges in social compliance, we try to help factories, managers, brands to have a close approach of the new requirements that are going to, at the end of the day, help them to be more competitive, to build long-term relationships, not only with the clients, with the factories indeed, with the stakeholders, and show that they can do business with.
As we travel the world and talk with a lot of manufacturers, we are trying to explain the business case for why social compliance is important. And we say that buyers view this as important and that they won't source from you. But let's hear directly from a sourcing executive what role social compliance actually plays in the whole process that you go through at Ellis.
Okay, so at Ellis, we source globally, obviously, and in the sourcing department, I am not allowed to place an order in a factory that has not been approved by our social compliance team. We have a team in our Miami office that goes through all the audits. We have overseas presence with QCs that are constantly in the factories auditing, and it's a constant work with my social compliance team. If I try to, tell them I would like to place an order with this factory, they're like, well, they're not approved. So I don't get to place anything at Ellis that our compliance team approved.
So basically you're saying to a factory, if you can't demonstrate that you are an ethical manufacturer, you're not going to place orders with that factory. That's very black and white. That puts it in really monetary figures for all of us, no matter where we are in the supply chain. So from Intertek's perspective, your organization does a lot of social audits all over the world, Latin America, Asia, really almost everywhere in the world. Do you see that other buyers share the same type of perspective as Ellis does?
Yes, yes, we do work with a wide spectrum of customers, and I have to be honest, it really varies. I mean, you have some that are kind of tick the box because they feel like it's because either the regulatory requirement or consumer pressure to have it, and then you have others that it's the part of the sourcing where they're not going to make that decision until it's passed. So, and I think that suppliers very quickly pick up on that perception. So when you're having conversations with them, as buyers out there, I recommend make sure that your buyers are actually are aware of the expectations and the requirements, and when they're on a phone call with the factories, don't just talk about quality or price or lead. Also talk about social compliance and have them say what that's expected of them. And if they've had a recent audit at that factory, just ask them, hey, I saw last July you had problems with your fire extinguishers. How is that going? Has that been repaired? Have you set up a procedure for checking for expiration? And so if you involve that conversation with your buyers and with the regular conversations, that's really going to set the expectation to the supplier.
Monica, as you work with a lot of different associations, industry associations in the apparel footwear space, and actually visit a tremendous amount of factories yourself, what attitude do you see that the factories have? Whether is it just the fact that the buyers are putting pressure on them, or do some of them perhaps get it on their own? They say, we know this is important, not just to our buyer. So
I would say both. In generally, the brands pressure have a very important role and have a big impact in the decision of a factory perspective, let's put it that way, to start a certification process in terms of proof that they are in compliance with the local laws and requirements. Basically, is because the brand is asking for it. Other initiatives, other factories really have an internal commitment. They are already convinced around all the benefits and the positive improvements that all the certification process can bring to factories, and mainly for workers. So in my experience, I found two different scenarios where factories take their own initiative to start a successful certification process, because the commitment starts from the manager, from the top, and goes down there and works very nice during the way. Other scenarios, until the brand doesn't necessarily ask for it, some factories doesn't take the final decision. But that tendency is changing lately, because in order to be in compliance, you need to not only be according with the laws of the land, you also need to take care about the benefits and the minimum rights that the workers has to have in the workplace. So factories are acquiring more awareness. They really feel the importance to do it, not just because it's a requirement. It's going to be a plus in their business dynamic, and they are going to help them to be more competitive worldwide.
Since we have people here on the stage who are working all over the world, throughout the supply chain all over the world, do each of you perhaps see a difference in different parts of the world in how facilities, and maybe even buyers that may be stationed in those other parts of the world, how they perceive the importance of ethical manufacturing and how they actually implement it? Do they get that it's management systems from the top, as Monica was saying.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I mean, I think the international buyers, I think the pressure and expectation for supply chain social compliance is still predominantly U.S. and European brands that are pushing for this. We have local offices globally across the world, and our Intertek local organizations do approach and work with local brands and local retailers. But I think now they're probably less mature, and they are interested and care about corporate social responsibility, but it's still predominantly at that overarching concept of like philanthropy or community projects, sustainability, like within their own corporate headquarters. But very few of them are actually setting up their own auditing program, like themselves for their supply chain. It's still pretty predominantly coming from U.S. and European buyers.
So that's the buyer's side of things.
On the buyer's side.
On the manufacturer, supplier side of things, do you see a difference there?
Yes, I mean, certainly I would say if we're comparing Latin America with Asia, the Latin American suppliers are certainly less mature in terms of having processes set up. I like to, I mean, thinking of those generational suppliers that you try and bucket suppliers in, where the first level is kind of entry-level suppliers that have no CSR policies at all, and they're just very variable standards, just depending on who the supervisor is that day on whether or not they are in compliant with the law. And they have, zero budget for CSR, and then you can move into generation 2 suppliers that have, that are in the compliance level. So maybe they have a CSR policy, but it's not owned by the management. They have a policy because a buyer, Pires, went and told them, you need to have a health and safety risk system management policy, so they write it up, but they don't really know what it means. They have some budget for CSR, but it's certainly seen as a cost to them. And very poor visibility into what's going on at that supplier. And then you kind of move into a commitment level, and I think that those suppliers in Asia, they are more into this commitment level where they have CSR policies, procedures, they're being reviewed. You have a very positive attitude from management in terms of being able to understand the audit and know what to expect. And then the very last generation is full cooperation. So this is full board commitment. They have policies and procedures in place. That's an actual management system that can be on par with a quality ISO type certification. They have a RAP certification. They are kind of that level 4 cooperation where CSR is seen as a competitive advantage.
Monica, you want to add some to that story?
Yes, I totally agree with you. There is a tendency that we see every time we conduct audits. There are factories that are already have policies and procedures and management system in place that works for them. And the benefit of that is they learn, and they, by experience, they have a different approach of those management systems that they created by themselves. They are aligned with the local laws, and the benefit of that is that works necessary for the factory and works for them. That is an advantage for the certification process. Makes the audit more easy for our auditors and for the factory also to have a better commitment of the system. Sometimes we have to work a little more harder with factories that are working in the implementation, are still in that stage, but at the end they work together with our program that offers also trainings to help them to prepare much better to conduct a successful audit, and also to keep the system going, not just because during the audit process or just because they receive when they receive a certification. we, in RAP, we teach them that the work just start there when they receive a certificate, because they have the challenges and the homework and to keep the system going, to improve, to adopt, and to develop all the policies and the program over the years for their own benefit.
As Jenna said, oftentimes suppliers view social compliance as just a cost. Yes, it does cost money to pay the workers the right wages, to give them all the social security benefits that they are due, to put in the proper security systems, cameras, outward opening, fire doors. All of those things do cost money. But the key thing is that social responsibility, ethical sourcing, is not just about costs. And if that's the way suppliers are looking at things, then that really is the wrong perspective. People need to be looking at these as investments in the future, in the sustainable business practices of whatever business they are in. And so there is a return on investment that needs to be factored into how everyone at all stages of the supply chain are actually involved. So when it comes to looking at that business case, don't know if any of you might have a few perspectives you want to share on that, on whether it's just a cost or it actually is an investment item. Monica, you want to go first?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak first. Of course, at the beginning, the factories, even the top management, see the process as a cost because it can be expensive. But at the end of the day, it will be more expensive not to do it. And will be more expensive not to be in compliance, not to pay their workers the right amount of money for their work, not to compensate according with the hours that they work. That will be a really disaster because not only put in risk the health and safety, all the benefits and all the welfare for the workers, but also put in risk the factory indeed, and of course at the end of the day the brand. So it's an investment in terms of opportunities to improve, to be better, and to offer to the market out there a nice letter of presentation that they are really in compliance, they really care about workers, and they are interested to maintain the system for the sake of the workers and the brands and the stakeholders and everybody who wants to do business with them.
So on our side, Ellis, when I try to explain to my mom what I do for a living, she has no clue what sourcing is, right? So I try to explain to her, okay, besides trying to find that factory that's going to give my company the most amount of money for the orders that I place, it's also my job as a risk management. As in, I want to place an order in a factory that I know is going to give me good quality and also goods on time. There's no point in paying that less penny if I can't get my goods in. With that, we want to create long-term partnerships with our suppliers. So we have had factories that, I've been with Perry for 10 years. We have factories on our matrix that have been here way before me. So it's the long-term partnerships that you want to work with. Yes, we do have, Perry does their audits on a yearly basis, where we send people in the factories to check everything, and if they're not compliant, we work with them. Our QCs are in factory working with them to help them improve, right? So not only now are they going to be getting Perry orders, they can get orders from any other customer as well. So it is a return investment for them. It costs money because it's not cheap to audit, right, factories, but it ends up coming back to them as only positive.
I mean, if you're wanting to source to a Western buyer, this is what you need to do. So it's worth taking the time to make that investment and setting it up right, setting up the processes, and basically having a culture within your factory, or like if you're a vendor or supplier managing several factories, just setting up that culture of transparency and compliance and having that just be part of the way you do business. You will have these type of long-term relationships with brands and retailers. that you can have yearly sales that can last for over 10 years.
More and more we're hearing brands, retailers say they want to have these long-term relationships in order to facilitate continuous improvement. Yes, there are those brands and retailers that go into a factory this season based only on the penny, the cost, and move the next season because the cost changes. But in order to really see a significant difference, have that continuous improvement, it does require the types of longer-term relationships that Ellis is talking about. Well, we have a number of other questions we could ask, but we want to see if you in the audience have some questions for the panelists up here. So we want to open the floor to you, give you that chance. And we'll share a microphone to make sure everybody can hear. So any questions right now? Otherwise, we can keep talking. I'll give you my mic.
Thank you, Clay. Danielle, my question is mostly for you, although I wouldn't mind hearing the perspective the others might have. You talked at length about how you've got a very sort of cut and dry approach. You're not going to place orders unless compliance says it's okay, and that makes things a lot easier for sourcing. But you also mentioned that the long-term relationships, and the factories that you've been sourcing from for over 10 years, they get it, that's wonderful. I'd like to know how the conversation goes with a new factory that perhaps doesn't get it. What does that, and I mean, do you have any experience where you've just down to brass tacks had to explain to a factory why this matters, and maybe they didn't get it the first time? What makes them come around? Is it just the fact that you're not going to get the order, or is there more to it? I'd like to get a sense, just from a very brass tacks level, what that conversation will be like.
Okay, just to make it clear, we have a compliance department that does all that work, right? So I can't technically speak for that, but I go to my compliance department and say, we are looking to book an order at factory ABC. So they contact our overseas QCs and teams that go into that factory and start a whole conversation. We obviously travel overseas as well, and we meet with new factories. We have offices overseas, Ellis, that is constantly out there looking for new factories, right? They do all the legwork for us, but it's pretty much implied that you need to follow procedures, to be able to work with us. Once again, you want to be part of Perry, they know that those are our rules and these are our regulations, so.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Hi there. So I understand when you have a very large brand, it's probably a lot easier for you to ask for that type of compliance from your suppliers. But I want to know, for a small business, what kind of advice can you give to somebody who's starting to look for, sourcing options, but may not have may not have such a high volume, high numbers? How can somebody who has a small business who's looking at, just kind of dipping their feet into this water to say, hey, because for you to say, hey, listen, I'm not going to place an order unless you're compliant. Whereas somebody who's maybe they don't have a lot of options, what could they do in order to source ethical options for somebody who's a designer or a small business who may not have that strong buying power, who might have smaller orders, smaller production capacity, but also still wants to, it's obviously very important to them.
Yeah, so I think there are actually a lot of factories that are already out there that you can utilize. The problem is you don't know who they are, where they are. And so throughout this entire conference, there are all these matchmaking, sourcing type of companies. And I think just working with them to find out who, and having the expectations. And then even at Intertek, we have a platform called Enlight, which has any factory that we've audited. we ask them to their permission, and we put their profile up on our site where you can go and you can see, and if they've had an audit, we actually place that result there. We have verification services to verify their credentials. Of course, if they've had any type of certification or RAP certification, we will put that certificate up there. So there are avenues. And if there's something that's really important to you, then you just need to have that conversation right off the bat. Like, you factory, because if they're in generation 1 or 2 suppliers, when it comes to social compliance, you're wasting your time. If you're small, they are going to shut the door in your face. So you need to look for those generation 3 and 4 suppliers that have already incorporated this into their process. It's part of the way they do business. And so they're saying, oh yes, of course, I've had an audit last month, and here you go, here are the results, or a RAP certificate. So, and I'm sure, go to the RAP website, they have their list of factories that are certified.
Also, we help those little ones that you mentioned in order to promote their certification. Once the factory start to think big, this is a key aspect. They probably are little, but they want to start to think big and act big. So they prepare themselves in order to have a successful audit, and they get it. They pass, they get a certificate. So now that information is posted in our website, so the buyers, brands, other competitors even, they can have a chance to look at them. But it's very nice to have that question, because some little factories wants to really keep in the mind of the big brands and buyers. And the advice that we normally give them is, yes, it's independent of the size that the company is, think big and start to work as big. So one first step is to show that they are following the steps on the compliance way. So this is the first one. Then they can publicize, they can show the world who they are, and little by little they are knocking the doors, and some doors are going to be open just to have that proof that they are in compliance, that open doors, even for the little ones.
To add to Jenna and Monica's point, on RAP's website, you can see all of the RAP certified factories. And if you have a specific need, particular type of product that you want to source, then you can contact us directly, and we can actually send that an email with your specifications and your contact information directly to those facilities, and they can contact you. We don't act as a middleman, there's no charge for that, but so you can contact us on that. I think we have another question here. Lisa?
Hi, my question's for Danielle. For social compliance audits, assessments, are you using internal employees to do that, or do you use third party or a combination?
Okay, we do both. So, our initial, Perry has private label brands that they sell. They also sell to big box stores and retailers. So, we use our internal QCs to go in there and check, and then we also take RAP certification for some factories as well, in lieu of an audit that year. It just depends on who our final customer is going to be, but both, I want to say.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. It's a very interesting talk, by the way. I hear a lot about the cost of compliance. What about the benefits of compliance, the savings, the reduction in the maybe the legal fees or the legal consequences, penalties, for example? Could you address that a little bit, maybe as a motivation to have compliance?
And I'll add to that question if I can, because it dovetails with one we hear. So what are the benefits of social compliance, particularly in the relation to legal fees, et cetera, various risks? Also, to add to that, can we see are there any production or efficiency benefits that might be quantified? So those are very cost-benefit questions. So.
Okay, again, I can quickly talk to that. I don't know about quantifying it, but what I can say is working for a place that has the humane aspect where the workers are happy, they're paid, correctly, what they're due, they have the correct time off that they're supposed to have. Workers that are happy have a less turnaround at the factories, right? So that means that your factory now becomes more efficient to the cost part because the worker's been there for a while and they've learned their skill, they mastered it, instead of just turning around all the time and having to teach, a new worker because he's not happy and he left for more money, or he left because he was being screamed at, or just various aspects.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the legal compliance, especially if you're in a country that has, the government that's coming in and evaluating, and they're giving you fines if they find that you are not meeting legal compliance. So that's one cost. And then I think the biggest savings would then be the productivity improvements you mentioned and the worker turnover. I mean, we at Intertek are asked quite often, to kind of measure this productivity or how much the savings or the annual turnover, but it's not easy to measure just because factories don't want to tell us what their turnover rate is, and you have to measure it very methodically, before an audit and after the audit or before training. But I think it's just human nature that if you treat your workers with respect and dignity, that they will be, happy, better workers, and much more likely to recommend that factory to their friend. Like, that's usually the biggest, highest compliment a factory can get, is their friends coming in town and needs a job, and they say, hey, come work at my factory, because, and it's not necessarily, of course, better wages and better hours, but it's the softer issues, just knowing that their voice is heard and that it's respected, and so having a good internal grievance mechanism where they feel like they can express their concerns and to be reviewed and treated well.
Social compliance, you could say, is all about risk management, and those risks often are in the legal arena. We're talking about worker turnover. In this industry, it is one of the most labor-intensive industries, but it also sees a significant amount of worker turnover because maybe it's different wages, but a lot of it is about how the workers are treated. So yes, in social compliance, you hear people talk about the workers. Workers must be treated properly, must be paid the right wages. But this is not only about workers. This is about the businesses themselves, the factories, the factory owners. Because if that factory is out of business because it is not profitable, then where are those workers going to show up to get their paycheck, to do their jobs? So this is about a sustainable economic process that builds ethical, responsible sourcing at all stages of the supply chain, so that everyone should be lifted in that economic environment. That tide is rising for all, not just the factory owner and not just for the workers. So maybe one last question before we end and stay on time. Anyone else? Well, maybe I'll just throw this quickly to the panel. We, just a few weeks ago, celebrated, well, that's the wrong word, we commemorated the 5th anniversary of the Rana Plaza tragedy. In just a few words, how would you say that tragedy 5 years ago has changed the world of ethical sourcing? And can we start with Ellis?
Yes, so it happened in Bangladesh, and it just made, we actually, I think, believe that we revised our auditing tools to include structural, building, and fire and electrical safety issues now. So there are new questions in the audit or new checkpoints that they have to do in terms of the structural business of it. It also it extended beyond Bangladesh. I want to say that majority of the other countries are also following more of a I think people even are, my compliance team mentioned that they even are hiring structural engineers sometimes to go over their facilities and make sure that everything is, copacetic with the new laws.
Yeah, I mean, right after that happened, of course, as an auditing firm, we suddenly got a very surge in interest, and those that were not previously auditing have suddenly kind of woke up and said, okay, we need to look into this. And so we provided a lot of advisory services, helped to a lot of companies to set up programs and to start those. But I think the biggest impact is what Danielle talked about being now just this global impact, because all of the brands and retailers that were producing in Bangladesh started having much stricter requirements around fire safety and building safety, and they all have global programs. So then, the factory in Mexico also had to meet that same requirement. So I really think it's really raised the bar globally in terms of fire and building safety.
Okay, in addition of what you said already, that you increase your requirements in the program, in RAP we did the same. We also increased our requirements in the principle number 8 in health and safety. We had 45 and now we have 94, 90 something. We include risk assessment as well as a tool for the factories in order to work more in prevention than correction. And we give them out there during our trainings all the explanations and tools that they need to understand, how to be prepared, how to prevent that other Rana Plaza happens again. And independent of the country, is more awareness that we are creating based on that tragedy. I have to say that it was terrible, but also was a good example for factories to prevent that the same story is going to be repeated, and to work closely in order to understand what the benefits are to be in compliance, not just because the local laws or regulations or programs or brands requirements, is to be very prepared for anything that can happen that probably can be unexpected if you don't really comply or you really don't prevent before anything really bad crash.
Thank you. So at the beginning of this discussion, we talked about the importance of price, quality, lead time, or delivery, and we've been focusing for this last 30, 45 minutes on how now social compliance, ethical, responsible sourcing is just as important as those other 3 sourcing imperatives. And unfortunately, our time has come to an end, but please join me in thanking the panelists, Jenna, Monica, and Danielle, for their insights. Thank you.